In July 2022 we took a Hebridean Islands Odyssey with Bibby's of Ingleton and drivers Peter and Jackie. The first stop after leaving Ingleton was the attractive small town of Callander in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park, an area of outstanding natural beauty near Stirling. It stands on the River Teith, where seats line the riverbank, perfect for watching ducks and swans and eating our sandwiches. Then we took the scenic route through the Trossachs, passing small lakes and forests on the way. We left the Trossachs at Aberfoyle and drove to Drimmen, where we spent the night at the Winnock Hotel. The next day we drove up the west side of Loch Lomond. Then we went over Rannoch Moor. Next we passed the Three Sisters of Glencoe, three steep-sided ridges that extend north into the glen. Then we descended through the pass of Glencoe down to the Ballahoolish Bridge and up the side of Loch Linney. At Fort William we turned left along Loch Eel, at the end of which we caught a glimpse of the Glenfinnan monument. The road runs along the side of Loch Eelt, following the line of the Fort William to Mallaig Railway. Road and rail come to the coast and head north, past the sands of Morar to the fishing village of Mallaig. This is the end of the line for the Jacobite steam train, which was in the station when we arrived. Here the train has to be backed up so the engine can be uncoupled from the coaches and moved to the other end of the train to return to Fort William in reverse. Here we were to take the ferry to the Isle of Skye, but we had some time to kill, so we wandered around the village, which the locals pronounce as Mallaig, watching the activities around the harbour. There was even time to grab a quick snack. We returned to the bus, where we had to wait for the Loch Boisdale ferry to clear the jetty so that ours could dock. Eventually the ferry was ready and we carefully inched our way on board. The ramps came up and we sailed into the Sound of Sleat to cross to Armadale. It was a bit choppy and there was a cool wind, but we all muffled up and enjoyed the crossing. "45 minutes later, after quick selfies by the camera crew, we arrived on Skye. From Armadale we drove the 42 miles to Portree, passing moorland, beautiful bays, mountains and waterfalls on the way. After After passing the famous Sligachen Bridge, we arrived in Portree, the capital of the island. Portree is considered to be among the 20 most beautiful villages in the UK and Ireland. The harbour, where most visitors head, is fringed by mountains, and the pier was designed by Thomas Telford. The houses around the harbour are famously painted in various pastel colours. Back on the coach, we drove 15 miles north to Uig, where we boarded another, larger ferry for the 1 3/4 hour crossing of the Little Minch to Loch Maddie on the Hebridean island of South Uist. After dinner on board, we looked for dolphins from the deck. We did see some, but they were much too quick for the camera. After disembarking from the ship, we drove south and crossed the causeway to the island of Benbecula, where we stayed at the Dark Island Hotel. Next morning after breakfast, we set off south, passing the RAF warning station. We then crossed the causeway to South Uist. Although North Uist, Benbecula and South Uist are separate islands, they're all connected by causeways. The road on South Uist is very narrow with passing places and runs between stretches of water and peat bog. Another causeway took us to the small island of Skye. We drove down the full length of the island to reach the Barra ferry terminal. We had some time to kill before the ferry arrived, so we spent it looking at the scenery. There isn't actually a terminal as such, just a slipway with wooden pilings alongside. Eventually we saw the ferry approaching across the Sound of Barra. The ramp hadn't even touched the slipway before the first vehicle began to disembark. Soon it was our turn to board. A very tight fit.
It went on last time.
It took 40 minutes to cross to the tiny, peaceful island of Barra. We drove off the ferry and turned right to go anti-clockwise round this tiny island. The coach stopped for some of us to take a walk along the edge of the sea to get some fresh air and take pictures. Jackie then dropped us off at Castle Bay and drove round the village to find somewhere to park. The village of Castle Bay is on the south coast of Barra, overlooking a bay in the Atlantic Ocean. On a rocky island in the middle of the bay sits Kissimmel Castle, built around 1039. It's leased to Historic Scotland for £1 and a bottle of whisky per year. In the harbour, a fisherman was removing the sharp points from the tips of crab claws. Then we drove to another causeway, this time to Watersee. Beyond the causeway, the roads are too narrow for the coach, but we just came to say we'd been. There's a small fishing harbour where crabs and lobsters are landed. Then we went back across the causeway to a viewpoint overlooking Castle Bay. Driving up the east coast, we came to a large sandy bay. This is Barra Airport, and the planes land on the beach. Sadly, none were due in whilst we were there. We continued along the coast back to the ferry. Then we sailed back across the Barra Sound to Skye. On the drive back to Benbecula, we were held up by a large flock of sheep, but eventually we got back to the hotel. The Dark Island Hotel is very close to the beach, so the next morning I took a walk from the back of the hotel along the track and past the football pitch. How on earth they managed to find enough flat land is beyond me. Just beyond the windmill, I scrambled over the sand dunes and down to the beach, along with a few other hardy souls. After checking out, we drove up the western side of Benbecula, passing farms, coast and peat bogs. Then we crossed the causeway to South Uist. After a short while, the sun came out and shone on these glorious sandy beaches. Passing a newly renovated black house, more on this later, we came to the Peeblesgarry Land Raiders Memorial. This remembers a group of local men who, when denied land promised for signing up for the First World War, tried to take it anyway. Across the road was another black house awaiting renovation. Hebridean sheep are black and very hardy. We passed Skulpeg Tower as we turned onto the north coast of Uist. Then we came to a pair of black houses. The renovated one on the right is 200 years old and called Struan. The other, rebuilt from old stone, is officially called Dark Lord, but affectionately called Big Sister. The rear extension has superb views. The shed is Grade 2 listed. Then we came to the causeway to the tiny island of Berneray. This is where we were to take the ferry to South Harris. From the ferry we could see seals basking on the rocks. The lighthouse is known as Dennis the Menace. We left the ferry at Leverborough and drove up the west coast. The South Harris coastline is particularly beautiful, and these holiday cottages took full advantage of the views. One of the most spectacular bays is at Seelabost.
Much better view at the end.
And he was right. In the distance is the island of Tarrantay, which was used for the TV series Castaway with Ben Fogle. Then we crossed onto North Harris. We drove over the hills and alongside Seaforth Lock before descending to Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis, where we stayed at the Caberfair Hotel. After breakfast the following day we drove to the northwest across Peatmore. After about 12 miles we came to the northwest coast and passed Hebridean sheep grazing in the wildflower meadow, which contains several varieties of orchid. Here we went to see the Trussell Stone. At nearly 6 metres tall and 2 metres wide, it's the largest standing stone in Scotland. It leans slightly to the south, though it doesn't seem to point to any particular solar, lunar or constellation target. The truth is, no one knows what it was for, but it's an amazing demonstration of what prehistoric man could achieve. Returning to the coach, we went northeast along the Hebridean Way to the Butt of Lewis Lighthouse, one of many designed by David Stevenson, son of Robert Stevenson of railway fame. Unusually, it was built of red brick and left unpainted. The Butt of Lewis is the most northerly point on the Western Isles and holds the Guinness World Record as the windiest spot in the UK. It's also home to thousands of seabirds. It was a fantastic experience to stand on the cliff edge and watch as the waves crashed over the rocks. We got a good photo of this cormorant on the cliff edge, and the seals clinging to the rocks for dear life. Some gulls like to nest on flattish land, but cormorants prefer little ledges. We walked back to the lighthouse, which changed from being manned to automated in 1998, to drive to the area known as Ness. Here, in a crofter's field, stands the ancient church of St Molwag. This Episcopalian church has been here since the 12th or 13th century, and may sit on a 6th century foundation. It slowly fell into disrepair, but was restored in 1912 and has been in regular use ever since. There's no electricity in the church, and they rely on oil lanterns for light. Pilgrims used to visit the church in search of cures for insanity. In 1630, it was recorded that people looking for a cure for skin sores and couldn't get to the chapel sent a wooden version of their limb to be placed on the altar. Nearby is the tiny harbour of Portness. We returned to Stornoway for lunch, and whilst we were there we wandered round the fishing harbour. With a population of around 7,000, Stornoway is the largest town in the Outer Hebrides and capital of the islands of Lewis and Harris. After lunch we drove to the west coast, to the Black House Village Museum at Gairrannan, where we were to finally learn about these traditional Hebridean homes. We went into the first building and were treated to traditional Hebridean singing as we looked round this tiny crofter's cottage.
Make your way to Stornoway on the road to Arnsay, where my thoughts return each day, my lovely Stornoway, where the folk are truly kind, where you leave the world behind.
In a room at the back of the cottage there was a demonstration of Harris tweed weaving. There are a total of 9 cottages in the museum, and they were lived in until 1974. In fact, they were the last group of black houses to be inhabited in the whole of the Western Isles. In one of the cottages, a video shows how life was lived in the crofts, where peat was used as the main fuel for heating and cooking. The Hebrides are so windy that stones on ropes are used to keep the thatched roof in place. Nowadays, several of the black houses are used as holiday lets. A tears gear leads on a bench outside the shop. This is the traditional tool used for cutting and turning peat. Further south are the Callanish standing stones. This is an arrangement of monolithic stones placed in a cruciform pattern with a central stone circle. They were erected 5,000 years ago and predate Stonehenge. They were an important place for ritual activity for at least 2,000 years. It's not known why they were erected, but the best guess is it was a kind of astronomical observatory. Every 18.5 years the moon skims especially low over the southern hills, dancing along them like a great god visiting the earth. Then we returned to the hotel for the night. On the 6th day we drove back into the centre of Stornoway. The castle grounds were being prepared for the Hebridean Celtic festival, so we crossed the river and made our way through the grounds to the castle itself, which is called Lewes Castle. It was built in the mid-1800s by Sir James Matheson, who made his fortune from the Chinese opium trade. It's owned by the council and the ground floor is open to the public. Outside, work was well advanced, erecting the marquees. Then we made our way to the terminal to catch the ferry to Ullapool on the mainland. We arrived in Ullapool in the late afternoon. The town, or rather small village, stands on the edge of Loch Broom and has a pretty little park on the edge of the loch. A short walk down the street takes one to the centre, 3 shops and a pub. Then we went to the Royal Hotel for the night, before the long drive home.